وسهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي، أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا مع ليلى الحسيني في بث حي ومباشر وعبر WNZK راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern, and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on WNZK 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning Michigan with Layla Al-Husseini. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues with your host, Layla Al-Husseini.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Good morning, everybody. Today, in the next hour, we will be discussing the recent Gaza war and whether we see a new shift, a new balance in U.S. public opinion. The live discussion broadcast is fed not just on radio, but also on Facebook. Go to the page of the U.S. Arab Radio on Facebook to watch us now on Zoom. So was it the video footage of dozens of children killed in Gaza, killed by Israeli strikes in the 11-day conflict in Gaza? Or was it the fact that Israel also targeted a building that housed news organization? Was it the voice of members of Congress expressing concern over taxpayer aid to Israel? Was it President Biden's focus on human rights or his call for equal measures of freedom and security for both, for Israel and the Palestinians alike? Was it a demographic and cultural shift within American society that helped achieve a new balance in public opinion, including a shift in the culture of young Jewish Americans who no longer share their grandparents' ideas as they relate to Israel? Or is it all of the above? We will be discussing that. So today, we will discuss those factors that may have led to maybe a more balance, not only in the media coverage of the recent Gaza conflict, but also in how Americans in general view Arab and Muslim communities in the country. And to do this, we have a group of distinguished guests and experts to help us draw some conclusions and some lessons. We have from Michigan, Dr. Brad Roth, Professor of Political Science and Law at Wayne State University. We have Dr. Abdalmajid Katranji, who is a political analyst and expert on Middle East issues. And we also have from Tunisia, Professor Kamal Ben Younes, who also had a long career as a journalist. So let's begin. And my first question will go to all three guests. And the question is, in your view, what is the most important outcome that has resulted from the Gaza conflict and why? And let's start with Dr. Roth.
Well, thank you. I think that there is a change in the way that people have started to view the situation in the Middle East and in the Palestinian question in particular. I think that the images, of course, as you pointed out, are significant. I think the fact that Israel seemed to precipitate this conflict through the actions taken in East Jerusalem and Sheikh Jarrah and on the Temple Mount. These are matters that have, I think, caused people to view this conflict rather differently than earlier conflicts. I think you also see a very significant change in the political constituencies behind the administration. Netanyahu, of course, was a very polarizing figure in US politics, someone who had aligned himself very much with the Republican Party, and therefore there was no love lost for him in Democratic constituencies. There's a much greater openness to a different way of seeing the world based on new constituencies the Democratic Party is drawing on in a period of increased consciousness about matters having to do with racism and colonialism. So I think all of these things affect the way in which the conflict is viewed.
Thank you very much. Dr. Katranji, what do you think about that?
I think ultimately, and I apologize to everybody, I'm having a little bit of trouble having video delivery. So I've got my IT guy working on it in a second here. So hopefully we'll figure out why. But there's still some, the most successful outcome from my perspective is that the political debate, the paradigm, the historical assumption that Israel is simply defending itself has been now refuted. The conflict is largely initiated by the policies of Israel with regards to settlement on Palestinian lands, and then the disruption of religious activities at its most, in some of the most sacred times for the Muslim community, as well as also underlying policy differences that are existing in Israel itself with regards to between Israeli citizens and settlers, between the definition of what makes you a full Israeli citizen and not. So a lot of these things have come to the fore, so that despite, I think, the sensationalism of the media discussion about Israel striking Gaza and Gaza throwing missiles back, which clearly displayed the imbalance of military might that occurs there now became a new narrative that says, well, wait a minute, maybe Palestinians are just defending themselves rather than being often misportrayed as the exclusive aggressors in this circumstance. So I think for a lot of Israelis, especially for moderate Israelis, a new opportunity has come to show that there's a new thinking or political thinking than what I would say the absolute Zionism of Benjamin Netanyahu. And for the Palestinians, there was a new debate that said, wait a minute, there's much more to the Palestinians than simply Hamas and other organizations that don't necessarily reflect the entirety of the Palestinian dynamic that exists in Israel. So I think that this conflict, albeit tragic, really brought to the fore issues that have been too long suppressed, ignored by journalists and by politicians. I think that it may be the launch point for some new optimism, despite the tragedy that we have seen.
Professor Kamal Ben Younes, welcome to you from Tunisia. And the same question I pose to you, which is, what, in your view, what is the most important outcome that resulted from the recent conflict in Gaza?
First of all, I don't believe that it was conflict in Gaza. The conflict started in Jerusalem, in all Palestine, and 1948 Palestinian-Israeli territories, and the new phenomenon that we had, new youth, new children from the so-called historical Palestine, West Bank, plus Gaza in street and asking for national, they have national request. The problem that we had good sign in international media, including in CNN and international American media, newspapers, for a humanitarian aspect of the conflict. Or the conflict is not only for some problem of dozens of children, humanitarian, it is not only political right for some people under occupation, like what happened for other African Arab states, Arab people under occupation. They have been asking equality with English or with French and others. The problem is national. The question, if we had good sides, are we going in the right side to solve the deep causes of this conflict who started 1 century again? And don't forget, we had several wars since 1936, so-called the large or the biggest Arab revolution in Palestine, Jordan, and Iraq, etc. Now, the problem, I think, is the vision, the perception of the conflict. We have to end talking about Gaza-Hamas conflict is a Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and it's a national conflict, is not only humanitarian one and human rights conflict or some political aspect of all conflict.
Now, both Dr. Roth and Professor Kamal Ben Younes touched on the issue that the roots of what happened lie in East Jerusalem, what happened in East Jerusalem. So let me go back to Dr. Roth, and I will get back with you, Dr. Ben Younes, and ask you what needs to be done now if the problem is rooted in East Jerusalem, the situation in East Jerusalem. This is someone, as we know, the Palestinians hope to have as their future capital city. So what do you think should be done about East Jerusalem?
Well, I think that there's no short-term solution to all of this, and I don't think that the Biden administration, frankly, is prepared to really take on the question in a very serious way. But I do think that people are starting to understand certain things about the conflict. You have a situation in East Jerusalem where the international community regards the territory as occupied, and therefore regards Jewish settlement in the territory as unlawful, when in fact you have something on the order of 200,000 Israeli Jews who have been settled on the wrong side of the Green Line since 1967 within the municipal boundaries of Jerusalem, which are, by the way, expanded municipal boundaries all the way from Bethlehem to Ramallah. So there is this fundamental demographic change, which you see then being assisted by efforts to drive people out of their homes in ways that are reminiscent of past practices of displacement. And so this is going to place on the agenda in a way that's very uncomfortable for the Biden administration, the realities of Jerusalem. And it will be interesting to see whether there'll be any room for maneuver. Certainly they're going to reopen the East Jerusalem consulate there. They're going to try to improve relations with local Palestinians. I don't see them necessarily moving the embassy, and I don't see them necessarily taking on the breadth of the circumstances.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we will ask Dr. Kamal Ben Younes what he thinks about the situation in East Jerusalem after the break.
While we've been staying safe at home, scientists have been on a journey. The destination, a COVID-19 vaccine. This journey began decades ago with research into other coronaviruses. Scientists built from there with months of research and development, cooperation with other experts worldwide, and clinical trials on tens of thousands of volunteers of diverse race, age, and health status. They arrived at a safe, effective vaccine, and hundreds of thousands in Michigan have already been vaccinated. But the next step is ours. We need to get the vaccine when we can. Keep wearing masks correctly and taking precautions until we reach our destination, freedom from COVID-19 and getting back to the lives we love. Discover the facts for yourself at michigan.gov/COVID vaccine. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
Are your hands feeling numb? Do you feel pain opening up a jar, turning a key? Are you noticing that your elbow and your shoulder are becoming stiff? Or were you recently injured in your arm? Hello, I'm Dr. Abdalmajid Katranji, and at the Katranji Hand Center, which just recently opened down the street from the Somerset Mall, we can provide you with the latest in hand, wrist, elbow, and shoulder care. Visit us at www.katranjihandcenter.com to learn the latest techniques that we have to offer you, and I look forward to taking care of you.
Visit us in Troy at 1565 West Big Beaver Road, Building F, or call Katranji Hand Center for an appointment at 248-869-4263. That's 248-869-4263. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab offers a great array of your favorite Mediterranean meals. Meals range from lamb specialties, shawarma sandwiches, and seafood dinners. Plus, they offer big trays of your favorite food and so much more. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab is located at 32839 Northwestern Highway in Farmington Hills and is open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So stop in or call Kashat's today at 248-538-9552. That number again, 248-538-9552. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab will definitely leave you satisfied. ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com. News that matters to you.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We are discussing with our distinguished guest the recent Gaza war and whether or not it has resulted in a shift or a new balance in public opinion. And my question goes now to Professor Kamal Ben Younes, who said that the roots of the problem lie in East Jerusalem. So what do you think should be done, Professor Ben Younes?
I have been in 1998 in Jerusalem, Ramallah, Gaza, and Palestine, Israel. I was invited by the late leader Yasser Arafat. At that time, we had a problem in Jerusalem, some conflict with the late Israeli Prime Minister Sharon, who started, he had one house in east of Jerusalem. But now the reality on the ground changed. The settlers, the number of the settlement and settlers around Jerusalem in all West Bank increasing. And we had a real problem. All the leaders, or the majority in the region of the world, welcomed Oslo and Washington agreement at that time between Rabin, Yasser Arafat, and Shimon Peres. But the extreme rightists in Israel killed Ishaq Rabin. And since that time, 25 years ago, we are in the vicious circle, mainly because of Netanyahu and his establishment. Now we are in the era after Netanyahu. We are in the era after Trump wrong decision, maybe with Democrats, with the new generation of policymakers, a new establishment in the US, in Australia, in everywhere in the world, in the Europe, etc. There is a new public opinion. There is a new generation. There is a new WMD, say the weapons of media, and that explain what we have millions and dozens of millions in the street in Africa, in Australia, in Indonesia, in America. I think now we have to think with a new balanced solution. We know, my background is historian before the media, that all the conflict against the previous occupation, British, French, and others, was in the same time against Israeli occupation. The main leader in national leader in North Africa, in Arab world, in Muslim world, have been at the same time part of the largest conference of Jerusalem in 1993. The leader was, by the way, Abdelaziz Faalbi, the Tunisian movement leaders. I think that if we don't start to resolve the deep causes of the conflict, the occupation, the problem of settlement, not to talk about Palestinian issue or Gaza issue as separate to the other issue. At the same time, if we want to cut the root of the so-called extremist or evil power in the region like Iran or other agenda, Hezbollah, etc., we have to resolve the conflict. If not, Palestinian issue will be one of the most disturbing issue. I think, it's my last sentence, that Biden administration and his Minister of Foreign Affairs didn't plan to go now in the region, but be under the pressure of the public opinion, the social media, the Wi-Fi, thanks to the Wi-Fi, the internet, etc. They had pressure. We had millions in South Africa, Nigeria, Indonesia, America, Australia, asking to end the political aspect of the conflict, the national aspect of the conflict, not only the humanitarian one.
Dr. Katranji, in the first segment of the show, you touched on the differences within Israel itself. What impact did the recent conflict have on the result, the effort that we have now in to form a new Israeli coalition government? And of course, it's a very strange coalition. Did the conflict play any role in getting us to having this strange bedfellows, as they say? Dr. Katranji, can you hear me? Okay, it seems that we have lost Dr. Katranji.
There we go. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, can you hear me? Yes, go ahead. If you can hear me, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. I apologize to again, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties with my Zoom app here. Look, I think there's two very big forces at play. And the conflict and I think, as the good doctor had mentioned, Dr. Kamal, is that the media and what I'm calling the independent and free media also highlighted this. One, you have the global occurrence of what happened with George Floyd in the United States. This idea of unfair, imbalanced, and institutional bias of a system against a specific group of people. On a global level, there's this discussion and narrative on what is unfair. And just as African Americans every day have to fear for their kids if they're stopped for a routine police stop, now people were seeing, and they saw the same parallel to a Palestinian 14 or 15-year-old that can end up in jail for up to 6 months without any charges, just because they happen to be disagreeing with a police officer trying to kick them out of their home. So there's a global force there that now suddenly put the Palestinian situation in an entirely new light. And that fractured a lot of the established institutional mechanisms that Israel has very often relied upon, and allowed for a lot of free-thinking Jews and moderate Israelis to suddenly say, wait a minute, we cannot be a state that victimizes an entire people like we see in the United States with the African-American community and some of the institutional systems that are there. So it's really important that the conflict now suddenly resonated with an established global issue that is in discussion on every Senate floor, parliamentarian floor, political floor, no matter where you are in the world. Number two is there was a significant rise in a recognition that there are very involved, moderate, Palestinian elected officials in the United States who suddenly now had a voice. And this was led by, I think, a global hero for the Palestinian people and a great American representative, Rashida Tlaib. Because suddenly Rashida is out there showing pictures of her grandmother and what it's like living on the West Bank. because as you said, very often this conflict has been tried to be framed as not Palestinian and Israeli, but as Benjamin Netanyahu versus Hamas. Rashida Tlaib shattered that historical hiding place for a lot of the politicians where they could kind of ignore the realities of this unbalanced and unfair power structure that exists. So now we see this new cabinet that emerged post Benjamin Netanyahu, very much an answer to the fact that Israel itself has to recognize that it's an apartheid state. And if it's even going to advance its own left or right message, it has to resolve those inherent conflicts in its country. And that, in the large part, is an opportunity now for the Palestinian people to show, hey, look, as an Israeli Arab, I'm not equal to an Israeli Jew. I have an Israeli Jew has the right to return. A Palestinian after the Nakba in 1948 has no right to return. So why is there this imbalanced law, imbalanced right? Even though, for instance, my niece or nephew may be an Israeli Arab, my great-great-grandchild may be an Israeli Arab, my cousin, and why does their neighbor in New York have the right to return into Jerusalem, but I may be also an Israeli citizen, don't have the right to return? So this exposed so many issues that for the longest time has been hidden by both American politicians, obviously by Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet, and by the media at large, that now finally there's this new paradigm, this new narrative, and this new government that we see in Israel has to face those new political issues and those new international issues in light of what they do to the Palestinians, whether they're Israeli citizens or whether they're living in the occupied territories.
Professor Roth, do you agree?
Yes, but I certainly want to highlight the role of my former student, Rashida Tlaib, who has really put a human face on these issues in a way for the first time for the American media. I think that she's played a very important role in raising people's consciousness about the human realities on the ground. But I also think that there are deeply entrenched interests here on the part of the United States government in respect of the region. And those are not going away anytime soon. The way in which the United States has characterized this conflict dovetails with a status quo orientation toward the region, which I think is not going to give way very easily. On the other hand, I think what's very important for people to realize is that the discussion of the two-state solution has become fetishized, that has become seen as an end in itself rather than a means to the end of mutual self-determination of both peoples. And I think that this is an argument that can gain traction given new constituencies that have been empowered within the Democratic Party and the sort of emerging consciousness of a younger generation of American youth generally and of American Jewish youth in particular, who are pushing back against the traditional positions of organizations that have claimed to represent the American Jewish community.
We are going to take a break right now. When we come back, I'm going to ask Professor Ben Younes, what changes would he expect to see now that Mr. Netanyahu is no longer prime minister? After the break.
Get ready for an amazing experience at Ishtar Restaurant on 15 Mile Road in Sterling Heights. Enjoy excellent hospitality from owners Ali Al-Baghdadi and Fatty Bonham, serving the best in Mediterranean food. Try Chef Ali Al-Baghdadi's famous shawarma, the best Iraqi grills and food, and the best Arabic and international dishes. Dine in our authentic atmosphere or take out. Call 586-698-2585 or check us out on Facebook. Ishtar Restaurant practices all CDC guidelines and is open every day 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Have an amazing experience today at Ishtar Restaurant, 3625 15 Mile Road, Sterling Heights.
Are you going to start a restaurant or a grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood 734-744-9796.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
When it comes to reproductive medicine, IVF Michigan Fertility Centers are the recognized leaders. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 5 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. As a founding member of IVF Michigan Fertility Centers, Dr. Nicholas Shama is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. Dr. Shama has performed over 10,000 IVF cases and has helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. American board certified in both obstetrics and gynecology and reproductive endocrinology and infertility, Dr. Nicholas Shama is a very caring, compassionate, expert physician that understands not only the medical but also the emotional toil of infertility on his patients. When it's time, get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio. Call toll-free 855-952-9600, 855-952-9600.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi, which is also being fed on Zoom, on Facebook, the page of US Arab Radio, if you want to follow us on Facebook and see what we all look like. Professor Ben Younes, a minute ago, Professor Roth talked about Mr. Netanyahu as being part of the problem by aligning himself with the Republican Party. Now, do you expect any changes now that Mr. Netanyahu is no longer Prime Minister?
We have good sign, both in Israel, Palestinian side, and American, after the failure of Trump, then the failure of Netanyahu. We don't have to forget that the main leader, the main Israeli leaders, and connected to Shimon Peres at that time, and the peaceful camp in Israel accused Netanyahu to be behind, directly or indirectly, the assassination of Rabin and the assassination of peace process. I think now we have to be pragmatic and to think about short-term action, medium-term, and long-term. For short-term, we have to end the terrible embargo, mainly on Gaza. We have 2 million in the bad situation now for more, maybe about 14 or 15 years. We have to end this embargo and to open borders to Egypt and to open borders to all Palestinians to move. It could resolve this situation. In short term too, we need an urgent plan of development to rebuild what Israeli army destroyed mainly in Gaza, and urgent plan of development. Don't forget that the first step of Oslo succeeded thanks to the development plan. I have been there as a journalist in 1998. Palestinians had airport, port in Gaza, and they had developed a lot of business in West Bank, east of Jerusalem and Gaza. Now, the population are suffering of poverty, miserable life, etc. We need, for short term, to open borders, to end embargo, and money to rebuild and to develop the situation. For medium term, I think we have to launch a new process of talks, of peace building, but through one. We have already dozens or maybe hundreds of thousands of proposals. Maybe we need Oslo 2 or New York 2, supported by a General Assembly, but a real peace process, or Madrid 2. And to restart, I think the current establishment in Ramallah and Israel have to understand that the new generation in all Palestinian territories and in diaspora will never accept what they accepted 20 years or 25 years ago. And for long term, maybe we have to rethink the slogan of a two-state solution. If there is no way to have two-state solution, there is no way to accept one state, but one Jewish state, but to think about, again, about one democratic state for all Palestinian, Israelis, and Christian living there, with democratic institution, and to end with this apartheid regime.
Professor Roth, historically, Professor Ben Younes will get back to some of your points, but let me ask Professor Roth now. Historically, several minorities in the US went through a great deal of discrimination. You have the Catholics, you have the Jews, the Japanese, the blacks. Where do you think do Arabs and Muslims stand in America today?
I'm probably not the person best qualified to speak to that question. I do think, of course, that the circumstances of the global war on terrorism represented a great setback for the rights of Arabs and Muslims in the United States. I think, though, that we are kind of coming out of the end of that and are reaching a new point where I believe that we're having increased levels of political participation by Arabs and Muslims, and a greater understanding, I think, on the part of a larger percentage of the American population of the extent to which there's certain kinds of default positions that have favored certain parts of the population over other populations need to be second guessed. And so I think that there is a lot of reason for optimism about the future in that regard.
Dr. Katranji, has the conflict eroded the status of Mr. Mahmoud Abbas or the Palestinian Authority to the advantage of Hamas in Gaza?
No, I don't think it has. I think that, remember, the root of this conflict occurred in the West Bank, and it occurred in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem. So fundamentally, that as right now, the current situation exists politically for the Palestinian community in Israel, is that the Palestinian Authority is in charge in the West Bank, and Hamas is in charge in Gaza. By the way, in Gaza, the Hamas was duly elected. It's not like this was a takeover by Hamas, but they were elected from within the Palestinian elections. I think the Palestinian Authority held a very powerful narrative about they are trying to advance the cause of peace. They're trying to advance the two-state solution that was agreed for in the Oslo Accords, and that there was this persistent disruption by Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet and regime to disrupt any power that the Palestinian Authority has. And Netanyahu burned a lot of bridges by aligning so strictly with Trump and this conflict that you can negotiate and resolve a conflict by just one side controlling everything: the narrative, the discussion, the negotiation, the finances, the political right, and the political integrity. I think that the Palestinian Authority played this effectively by saying, look, we're here, we're available, we're trying to advance the cause, and look what's happening when we just assume that Israel's always right about everything. And in that narrative, although he appeared weak, now we can see that now if you're going to have to resolve and engage this issue on the ground and get some real action taken, you have to not only work with Hamas in Gaza, but you also have to recognize and support the authority of the Palestinian Authority and Mahmoud Abbas. So he is not the most powerful picture in this situation right now, but he's certainly much better aligned because there's a bigger global platform for him to speak and to speak out about what he's actually facing and having to deal with. I think he's got a more sincere opportunity to reflect the limitations that he has as a result of the historic Trump Netanyahu paradigm that existed for the past 4 years.
Professor Ben Younes, if you have any comment, but let me ask you, earlier you talked about the need to end the blockade in Gaza. Should Hamas acknowledge the existence of Israel in return for the establishment of a Palestinian state?
First of all, as I said, I have been in Gaza, and I have opportunity to meet always Palestinians from Gaza. Some of them are still connected to Fatah and PLO and others. Gaza is not Hamas, and the conflict during last 11 years wars, since 2009 war and 2012, 14, etc. It's not a Gaza war. It's Palestinian conflict. And one of the mistakes, in my point of view, of Mahmoud Abbas' staff, that when part of his country was attacked by missiles from Israel, he did not work, he did not lead Palestinian people. That explains why he's losing his leadership. And now we have people in Ramallah, in West Bank, in Jerusalem, and Gaza asking to release Marwan Barghouthi and other Palestinian leaders from Fatah and other PLO groups to give to other side of Palestinian to have new leaders, not only Hamas leaders. I think we have to have Europeans started already and other states started to work with Hamas, but the problem is not Hamas or Fatah or PLO, because you remember that Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas and PLO leaders were accused to be terrorists too. Then they opened the discussion. It was in Tunis in 1988. I attended this negotiation. It was where Pelletro was American ambassador in Tunis. Then he used to be promoted to Deputy Secretary of State. Maybe Americans had a good experience, and the international community had a good experience in Rwanda, in ex-Yugoslavia, and other conflict recently in Libya. Libya was very, very complicated conflict between Russian, Turkish, French, English, Americans. But when US administration took decision and had support from UN, we had the end of this conflict in few days. And I think that there is no way to have peace and serious success process to fight extremism, frustration, and terrorism without resolving this long-term conflict of Palestinian state. I think we have to start with a solution. I have been in Rwanda in 1995, 96. We had nothing in Rwanda. We have millions of people killed. Now Rwanda is the most developed country in Africa, maybe. I have been in South Africa. Now we have the end of apartheid, and we have a new one-state developed state. We can build this state in Palestinian, Israeli territories. And I think that one of, I end with this sentence, one of the advantage of Palestinians and Arabs in this era, they had understanding Hebrew, they had decades of negotiation with the Jewish, with international culture, with Western culture, and maybe the Palestinian elite and Jordanian elite are most developed than other elite thanks to the occupation. They can rebuild a new state and to end with this kind of in conflict, in taking into consideration that we have national problem and political problem, not only a humanitarian one.
When we come back after the break, I have a question for Professor Roth. Are we really witnessing a real shift in the thinking of young Jewish Americans? When we come back.
Life is a nonprofit charity that's provided humanitarian aid and development to people and communities for over 25 years, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Please help improve these efforts. Make your tax-deductible donation to Life now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. Enjoy the first Syrian-style cuisine in Michigan. At Damas Cuisine and Catering, you'll find a wide selection of Syrian foods and sweets in our menu, like frikeh, hoisin, grape leaves with steak, mishawi platter, hot mahashi, char-grilled kebab, shawarma, and much more. Get super fast delivery from Damas Cuisine and Catering right to your door. Order online at damascuisine.com/menu and track your order live. Damas Cuisine and Catering, 28841 Orchard Lake Road in Farmington Hills. Call 248-987-4985.
When you're looking for the best in optical care, Dr. Imad Nakash is your doctor to see. With years of experience and thousands of successful procedures performed, you can trust your eyes to Dr. Imad Nakash. See Dr. Imad Nakash and his professional staff for your eye care needs. There's 2 locations to serve you. In Hazel Park, call 248-336-3937. 248-336-3937. In Rochester Hills, call 248-299-3937. That's 248-299-3937.
At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted, and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We are talking about the recent Gaza war and whether or not it had any impact on a shift or a new balance in public opinion in the US and elsewhere. Professor Roth, are we witnessing a real shift in the thinking of young Jewish Americans? And if so, explain to us.
Yes, I think so. I think a lot of it has to do with a generational shift, given the way in which earlier generations grew up with certain kinds of narratives. I was born in 1962. I went through school in the 1970s learning about a kind of immaculate conception story of Israel, an idea of a heroic narrative of Israel embattled, surrounded by on all sides, by hostile neighbors, fighting to survive, and being the embodiment of Jewish self-defense in the wake of the Holocaust and in the wake of the sort of the legacy, or long-term legacy of anti-Semitism in Europe and the United States and elsewhere. I think that young Jews growing up today have a very different narrative. They have seen Israel in the position of power in the region, projecting that power against Palestinians. They don't have the same mindset of an earlier generation. And when they see threats to American Jews, they see it through the lens of what's been going on recently, which is the association of anti-Semitism with white supremacy, with this idea of Jews will not replace us. This notion that Jews are somehow collaborating in the undermining of the position of certain kind of nativist interests in the United States. And so it's natural then for young Jews to identify with a movement that seeks to resist racism and colonialism of all kinds. And that, I think, definitely creates momentum for a different way of viewing things. There was a Pew Research survey this last month that dealt with public opinion in the Jewish community, and I think it validates the idea of considerable generational shift toward a new kind of understanding of the circumstances in the Middle East and the relationship to Israel.
Thank you, Dr. Roth. And I have an honest question for Dr. Katranji. Do you think, Dr. Katranji, that that on the Palestinian side, we have a real obstacle now, not just in the thinking of the Palestinians, but the actual division among the Palestinians as an obstacle to achieving a real solution? And not just the division, but also the non-acknowledgement by Hamas and others, Jihad and others, of Israel's right to exist. Do you think, is it time there is an equal change within the Palestinian community?
I think it's a great question, Dr. Jawad, and yeah, one has to be realistic to the facts of the ground. It's the very reason why American Jews and the Jewish community globally has actually become more moderate toward the Palestinian cause and very often supportive of Palestinian rights is the fact that it's, as Dr. Roth described, that the historical narrative that supplied the political movements of Zionism no longer really hold some power or influence to the reality on the ground. In the same token, for the Palestinian community, it has been an evolution of self-identity, of demographic strength, political power, and influence, as Palestinians have successfully entered almost every level of politics, even here in the United States. The chief negotiator for the United States in the recent conflict between the Palestinians and the Israeli government of Netanyahu was Mr. Hadi Omar, which was the first time a Palestinian American was actually on the table to negotiate on America's behalf. And you can't have a person like Hadi Omar there who insists that Israel doesn't exist. What you have is a voice, even Rashida Tlaib, the congresswoman. She's never denounced or a Palestinian elected American never denounced the right of Israel to exist. And it's because people like Rashida exist, Hadi Omar exists, and several other leading thinkers in the Palestinian community have now been able to get the center stage to say, look, this is not about Israel's right to exist. This is about the Palestinians' right to be a free and viable people, to enjoy their life. That shift in conversation has even forced groups like Hamas, as we know 2 years ago, to maybe temper a lot of their argument even though they didn't come out and say, we recognize Israel's right to exist, what they said is, we recognize the fact that Israel exists. So even they are being forced to now shift, because you're not going to be able to achieve a lasting and viable solution for the people and advance the cause that you have for your own people if you're going to oppress other people. That was the mistake that occurred for Israel's right to exist. For the longest time, the Zionist narrative was a land without people for a people without a land. And people literally thought Israel was empty, that there was no one there. Well, they didn't realize that there were actually Palestinians. And there's a great story by Dr. Gabor Mate, a Holocaust survivor, a very proud Canadian Jew. He's on the Russell Brand podcast for people to hear, is that it's that created the oppressive environment that ultimately is non-viable for Israel in of itself to continue to exist unless it addresses it. For Palestinians, they have the same obligation. But now the world can see that when a Palestinian is fighting for their right, it's not just simply the right to live in Israel, it's just simply the right to be. And I think that's opened the door for the moderates in the Jewish community and in the Palestinian community, where they have removed this idea that this is a Jewish-Arab conflict, but really an issue of identity, political rights, political equality for a people in this land called the Palestinians, who deserve a state, who, like Dr. Kamal said, deserve economic opportunity and development. They have a right. It's not just simply they deserve it. That's their right, and that they're going to have to live with the Jewish community that's been their neighbors, not since Israel has existed, for thousands of years. It's not new that Jews and Palestinians and Arabs live next to each other. They've lived with each other since time immemorial. These are both Semitic tribes that call each other cousins. And I think now that this current situation provides the opportunity for all parties to start saying, look, we have to recognize that we need to be neighbors, because guess what? We've always been neighbors. And I think that lends to some hope and optimism.
Professor Ben Younes, I need your input here. So briefly, I don't have much time left, but don't you think that if Hamas and other Palestinian groups acknowledge Israel's right to exist in peace and security, that might change the parameters on the ground?
To be honest with you, I remember that we attended several conferences, Chatham House Roar, closed with American, Israelis, and Palestinian, including people from Hamas. And they said some of them said that we are not supporting two-state solution, but we are accepting two-state reality. And they are for new process. And I think that the support of Arab states and others can convince them to accept not only two-state reality, but also two-state solution. I think we have now the big problem in Ramallah. In the other side, they don't have leader. Mahmoud Abbas is a friend for 30 years, unlike other Palestinians who have been here with Arafat. And I visited him, and every time when he visited Tunisia, I met him. Mahmoud Abbas is not like Arafat. Arafat was a leader. Mahmoud Abbas is a president. And the president with no power. That Palestinian on the other side need leader. I explain what I'm asking to release Marwan Barghouthi and others. And I think Hamas will accept at least two-state reality.
Thank you, Professor Kamal Ben Younes from Tunisia. I also would like to thank Dr. Brad Roth and Dr. Abdalmajid Katranji. And in conclusion, I thank you all for being part of this program. We'll see you the first Friday of next month. Have a good, very good weekend.
Thank you very much.